Sorry. And then, like Dr. Skretta said, Jamie will then cover specifically what your district is, what your plan is for your district, what that protocol is going to look like as teachers, what do you have to do, what are the counselors going to do, what are the nurses going to do, kind of the who and what, so you know what that's going to look like. And then hopefully at the end we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So return to play, like Dr. Skretta said, was where this all originated. And that didn't even happen in Nebraska until 2012. So when we think, concussions have been big in the news recently. But, my husband was an athlete, and he said he had multiple concussions, and back then, so many years ago, in the early, late 1990s, early 2000s, there wasn't a lot. It's like, well, if you said you felt better, as long as your parents said, maybe my coach told me I should probably go to the doctor, but my dad was like, you're fine, go play. And that was it. And now there's a very different mentality surrounding concussions. One of the biggest things that this law did was say you don't actually have to be diagnosed with a concussion to be removed from play. If they suspect a concussion, if you're showing any symptoms of a concussion, your coach is required to pull you, and you can't start that return to play progression until you've been medically cleared, which is kind of removes your parent from just saying you're fine, go. A tool that schools have is called impact testing. So a lot of your athletes do this at the beginning of the year. They get a base process. And used to know if, even if they're not having symptoms, there is still some neurological processing that is delayed or isn't quite back up to par. This is a tool to help them know that. However, do this on every student. And so you're not always going to have that information because, as we're going to talk, Return to Learn is a process that casts a wider net for all students, not just your students. First step is complete rest. You're removed until you no longer have symptoms. Asymptomatic is the term that I believe Jamie uses in a lot of your protocol. And then once a student is asymptomatic and they do the impact testing and their athletic trainer, it can be the athletic trainer that's clearing a student to play, or it can be a doctor. Once they've been cleared, then they can start this step progression of the light aerobic activities, then doing maybe some event-specific exercise. The purpose of this is that each of one of those steps has to be at least a day. It might be longer than a day, so it's going to take at least a week. By the time they start this, they get cleared, to the time that they get back on the field for competition. If they start to experience symptoms at any level of that progression, then they're going to back down, because that's their body's sign telling them that, if they were experiencing headaches post-concussion, their symptoms had gone down, they had improved, then they start this physical activity again, and my headaches come back. Okay, that's my body's way of telling me I'm not fully healed, I need more rest, I need to back down, give it a couple days, and then try again. And that's why this is a very specific step-by-step process. So this physical and mental rest is step one of return to play. So it only makes sense that, that could be a couple of days, it could be a couple of weeks. In that time, a kid's going to be in school. And so return to play really kind of jumped the gun, so to speak. And they decided, well, we really need this return to learn protocol that step one of return to play is all return to learn. It's all that time before a kid can start that physical activity again. But they need that mental rest, because that's what school is. School is all using your brain, and your brain is injured, and therefore you need a plan in place to provide some support. Just like if you injure your ankle, you're not going to go run a mile after you've just injured your ankle. You need your brain. These supports for the brain to have rest, heal. until this law doesn't go through until you know, after return to play was in place, now protocol. One way it's a pretty specific plan, specific to whatever the problems the student is having. We're going to provide these kinds of supports, and then we're going to different disability, something that's going to impact a student for a long period of time, whereas this should probably only need to be put into place for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4. If the student is continuing to have symptoms past 4 weeks, then you're going to put some other steps into place. Maybe you're going to look at a 504 evaluation, or maybe you're going to increase some of the adjustments that are being made, but it shouldn't be long term. And so the term that I use when I talk about these plans is an academic adjustment plan. You're making short-term adjustments for a student until they're healed, until their brain is back to full capacity, and then they're no longer going to need them. So it shouldn't be something that, you know, you get this plan that says, I can't give this kid any homework, they can't do reading, they can't take notes. Well, that's true, they may need that, but they're not going to need it your whole entire semester. It's going to be short-term. If we provide them the appropriate amount of rest in the front half, in the beginning, then they're probably not going to need as much support towards the end. And like I said earlier, there's 2 kind of key pieces to return to learn. One is that it has to precede return to play. So if a student is having symptoms of headaches and needing to be removed from, you know, taking some breaks from the classroom, they're going to the nurse's office and lying down for 20 minutes and then returning to class. Or they're not able to do a lot of reading because reading really spikes their headaches, something like that. As long as they need those, then they're not cleared to begin that return to play process. Does that make sense? So it has to be that they are not having any symptoms, they're back to full speed in the classroom, and then they get that clearance if from the medical doctor to start that return to play process. So that's where the 2 things really merge in terms of communication, that communication has to be coming from the teachers to the coach, whatever that why is, get that information. Is you have to think about it. Communicate kids that are in club sports or out of activities where these injuries may have occurred there in the first place, then that communication has to be open between to be talking to those about the student's progress. So the return to play law, it really focused on education. So one piece of removal from Lathrop, when he implemented this, was education of parents, athletes. The more the knowledge that they have, just like my husband's dad saying, you're fine, go play, had he known the long-term implications of concussions, he might have took it a little bit more seriously. And that's the same thing with this, convincing parents that we need to, number 1, know about it, because it is going to impact their day at school. And then number 2, you have to be willing to let these things be put into place as a support. It's going to promote faster healing for your student. So that is bullet point number 1. That's the whole point, is that they shouldn't have to be out of school for a long period of time. Typically 2 to 3 days, if their concussion they are experiencing symptoms that are that bad, they maybe are going to need to be out 2 to 3 days. There was an article that about Lincoln Public Schools in this process that was published last fall, and their numbers in there had decreased by implementing the return to play process. Their numbers were high to begin with. I think it said like 19 days out of school was average for a student after a concussion. With return to play, it had decreased to 15. I'm not sure why it would have been that high in the first place. Maybe I wasn't interpreting the numbers right, but either way, if we do this and we put the supports in place in the forefront, we shouldn't have quite as much time out in the long run. And then, like I said, that whole communication piece is huge for this, that everybody knows what's going on and everybody's following the plan and everybody's communicating. Second impact syndrome is a condition where a student sustains a concussion, and then before that concussion is healed, they sustain a second impact. About 50% of second impact syndrome incidences result in death. So it is serious. There was one of the student athletes who really worked with Senator Lathrop. His name is Brady Barron, and he was a high school athlete who sustained a concussion, was diagnosed with impact, was in a coma for 5 weeks, and then months at Madonna doing rehab. And so he really wanted to push both of these processes in education. I know if it was a concussion, I wouldn't have gone back on the field. Jake Snakenberg was a student athlete in Colorado. That his case really highlights the communication, what we would call now, this was back in 2004, we would call a concussion. But it wasn't really formally diagnosed. He'd had some headaches, you know. He'd been at school. He'd gone to the nurse a couple. Even though I was talking to information ever got relayed to his coaches. His coaches didn't know the seriousness of his injury, that he was having these symptoms, and when he went on the playing field, took a hit that wasn't that hard of a hit, but enough that he ended up with second impact syndrome and died. And so Colorado really, after that incident, banded together and started this movement back in 2004 in terms of really making sure that that communication is happening. If students are reporting symptoms, that the adults who are with them all day long, whether it's their teacher or the nurse or even the education of their teammates, knowing that if they are experiencing those symptoms, that needs to be reported. For you guys, what we want you to know is the piece of that background education, and that, even just that information that I told you now, and then some signs and symptoms of concussions, that's what I'm going to cover next. And then the other piece is what exactly am I expected to do in my classroom for these students? Like I said, we're going to think of it similar to a 504 plan. It's going to be pretty set out, specific to what the student needs. But I'll give you some examples of some adjustments that might be appropriate for students after a concussion. So those are the next two things that we're going to go over in my presentation. Do you guys use Plickers? Anybody? A few? Okay. We're going to hand out some Plickers cards and just go over some kind of test your knowledge, your background knowledge on thank you. There's only 63, so just every third or fourth person take one, and then you can pass them around as we switch questions. And then we'll cover symptoms. I know, it's going the wrong way. I don't know if this is working. It's like pointed off. Oh, now it's coming back to me. It might be okay now. Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. Here's how Plickers works. If you look on the top, there's on each edge, there's an A, B, C, or D. So based on your answer, put that one at the top. So you do not have to become unconscious to have sustained a concussion. If you think A, put A on the top. If you think B, put B on the top. Okay, and then bear with me. I'm going to hopefully get this.
This is actually the baseline test to see if you got it.
It is. There's more back here that I'm not getting. So this is a tool for you guys to use in your classrooms as well. You just print these, it's all free, you just print these cards off of the internet. Okay, I didn't get everybody, but I got most of them. About Plickers? We could do a quick in-service on Plickers at the end of the day. It's super easy. So, good job. A concussion does not have to mean that you are unconscious. Actually, most of the time, students remain conscious. CDC reports an estimated 1.6 to 3.8 billion sports and recreation-related concussions occur in the U.S. each year. In some Nebraska data that I have, about 1.7, or excuse me, this is still CDC data, about brain injury, concussions. We're talking a pretty large number in general of incidents. Most do not involve a loss of consciousness. And like we said earlier, it might be sports related. That's kind of what we hear. All right. Things about it's not just student athletes. It's playground falls, car accidents, unfortunately, category. 8% correct. Good job, guys. All right. A concussion is usually diagnosed by neuroimaging tests such as a CT scan or MRI. A, true. B, false.
You just wait till they come in.
Oh, you're that big.
So I give you all really awesome names like Susie and Betty and Johnny. All right. Let me come over here. I don't think I'm picking up you guys over here very well. All right. Very good. So there is the way that we're diagnosing concussions right now is just reporting symptoms. We're looking at the symptoms they're reporting and we're making a decision if it's a concussion or not. Some cool things that are going on at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, within that whole expansion of Memorial Stadium, there are actually 2 research labs in there that are focusing on this, and I think this will come. I think eventually there will be some medical tests that they will be able to use to make these diagnoses. But right now, we don't have anything real scientific to know, because these are functional, not structural injuries. So if there's a bleed on the brain, you're going to be able to use this and make these decisions. But in terms of just finding out if there is a concussion or not, you won't. The way that they just is this makes sense to me. So symptoms during a concussion are thought to be due to an energy because there's not enough fuel that is needed for the cells to work efficiently. Okay, so for doing things like thinking, reading, writing. To look for bleeding on the brain. For the most part, they're going to show normal functioning because they're not going to pick up on these impact of functional things like thinking. Can't show that, or memory loss. All right, we'll move to our next question on clickers here. All right, a concussion is just a bump on the head. I think I've made that point. Beat that dead horse a little probably, but what's that? It doesn't change? Did it change your answer? Yeah. It'll count you even if you're not an option. Okay, so like I said, it's a traumatic brain injury, and you're talking mild to severe level of symptoms, but either way, it's a brain injury. All right, a parent should awaken a child about every, just gonna go. There we go. A parent should awaken a child about every hour after a concussion. True or false?
I feel true.
And you can hide my niece said. Is it about? You can.
Okay. You guys had all right. Rest is actually the best medicine for a concussion. So it's a myth. A kid then you may want to have it clear. However, that back in just like you would. However, it's okay if they fall asleep, but we want to say, obviously, note of caution, have them checked out medically first. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add something to that real quick. I know a lot of you probably answered true to that because doctors' offices have said, wake them up through the night, which they do. The reason that they do that is because they're wanting to make sure they're not having a brain bleed, which is going to be different than a concussion. So yes, rest is really important. If you call your doctor's office, they may have you wake them up maybe a few times during the night. Probably wouldn't be every hour. But when you're waking them up, they're actually having you check to make sure that they will, become fully conscious, that you're actually able to wake them up, and that they're not having some bleeding going on that, that is going through the whole night that you don't know about because they're sleeping. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. They really, really need the rest, but sometimes the doctor's offices will have you wake them up. I just wanted to add that. practicing, because I know a lot of doctor's offices have to do that.
Thank you. So side note on Plickers, what I like about this is if you're doing this as an assessment of your students' knowledge, it's going to give you a report. So it's going to tell you for each question what percentage of your kids answered correctly, and it's also going to tell you which kids, if you do this where you assign each kid to a number, it's going to tell you which kids got the answer correct and which didn't. So if you're going to use it in your classroom, it is a great tool to know kind of what you maybe need to do some reteaching on. And it's great because kids can't really cheat off each other because they can't really tell by looking at another kid's card what they're answering unless they look really closely for the A, B, C, or D. So I like Plickers. If you have any questions about it afterwards, let me know. Hopefully we'll have time to do it as kind of a post-assessment of you guys' protocol here at school. What I'm going to do now is just switch over to a brief video that's kind of reinforced a little bit more about symptoms. I'm going to talk much more about it, talk a little bit about some strategies that you guys can implement in your classroom and that you may be asked to implement in your class based on your student's plan in Return to Learn. And then we'll move on to presentation. Oops. Do you have sound? Oh no, I have an ad.
Your bell rung and getting a ding, but the truth of the matter is that it's a brain injury. It can happen in all sorts of different ways. It can happen certainly on a sports field, a helmet collision, for example, but it can also happen in ways that you might not expect. For example, in a car accident, even if your head doesn't hit the dashboard or hit the windshield, just the violent moving back and forth of the brain within the skull during a car accident, for example, can cause a concussion. People think, for example, if this is the brain, around it is the skull, and then you have a helmet, that there's a blow, and everything you just get a blow to the brain. That's not exactly what's happening. Typically, if all of a sudden this brain is moving this direction, another helmet, for example, is moving this direction, then they both suddenly stop. What happens is this brain keeps moving within the skull, bounces back and forth, almost like a beach ball in a swimming pool. At the same time that's happening, the brain is actually elongated. It's like almost a fluid medium. It feels like almost like jello, and it's going back and forth and stretching out at the same time. And that's really what ends up causing that concussion. That back and forth, that stretching out. One thing to keep in mind about concussions is that they don't mean that you necessarily lost consciousness. People can have concussions that have been awake. A really important point. Typically, someone is just going to feel a little bit out of sorts. They may have a hard time figuring out exactly where they are, what their surroundings are. They may be seeing stars, especially in the outside of their vision, the periphery of their vision. Things may sound hollow because their hearing is not quite intact right after a concussion. But typically, it's people around somebody who's had a concussion that are going to notice the most. All people recover differently from concussions. So some people can take weeks to recover. Some people may take just a few days. But the key is that they have to be absolutely symptom-free. They can't have any symptoms at all. Because what that means is the brain is not completely healed. And if the brain is not completely healed, and the person gets a second concussion, then all of a sudden you've taken a problem that someone can recover from and turned it into a potentially fatal problem. The brain needs to rest, and that means lots of things. No texting, for example, no screen time. Has gone away, and then they slowly resume activity. We've seen now through this new study, the brain are already signs that are similar to Alzheimer's brains, and it's because of repeated blows to the head. It's really changing everything. They prevent as much as possible those helmet-to-helmet hits, which make for great highlight films, but unfortunately now more than ever what it's been doing to people's brains.
All right, so that summarizes, for the most part, signs and symptoms. One tool that your school is going to use, we talked about impact testing, that we have that for our student athletes in terms of once they are symptom-free, has their neurological functioning returned to baseline. However, during the recovery period, your school is going to use what's called a concussion symptom inventory. So this is a 0 to 6 scale that students will complete based on what symptoms they're having and the severity that they're having. Obviously, with younger students, they're going to need some assistance in knowing how to rate their own symptoms. It might be that a student has just one symptom, like a headache, but it's a 6, and it might be that they have 4 or 5 of these things on here, but maybe they're rating it as a 1 or a 2. You get a total score. For the most part, it doesn't tell you a lot. Is that true? It doesn't tell you a lot regarding if they just have one severe or multiple more minor. Either way, they're having symptoms.
Right. You know, what they found is even one symptom is as significant as multiple minor ones. So a lot of people feel like, well, they're confused and they're dizzy and they have a headache and this is so major, but it's actually more the length of the symptom. So it really their only symptom was a headache, but it lasted for 2 weeks. That's a lot more of a big deal than somebody who had 5 symptoms on the first day that all went away. So people tend to think the more symptoms you have, the worse off you are, but it's really more the length of any one symptom. And that's why being asymptomatic is so important, because you're not healed. So we need you to get healed as fast as you can by minimizing classroom time and no activity.
Young. And then afternoon. Supports that we're giving them throughout the day so that their symptoms aren't increasing that significantly, because when they do, that means they're not going to, their healing time is going to be longer. They're not getting the amount of rest that they need to keep their symptoms down and let their brain heal. So again, it's data-based decision making that we want to focus on. Each day, the student should be getting better and better, and they should be able to do more and more. And the adjustments that you're having to make in your classroom should be less and less. If that's not the case, then, again, that's that communication piece. That information needs to be communicated from teachers to the health office staff, to the guidance counselors, so that they can adjust the plan so that those symptoms are decreasing. So whether it's building in rest breaks throughout the day, pulling back on the amount of homework the student is doing, those kinds of things. That all needs to be discussed, kind of similar, again, to RTI or special education or anything else, on an individual student basis, what the symptoms are and what adjustments need to be made. So I think we've hit that one hard enough. Cognitive rest is the key. 75% of cases should recover within a week, and 90% within 3 weeks. So if you're putting these adjustments into place, you're not talking long term. Like I said at the beginning, maybe 2 to 3 days out of school right away post-injury if needed. When they're home, again, this communication often comes from doctors, but it can come from you guys too. They need cognitive rest. That means no phones, no texting, no computers, no TV, no video games. Good luck. I mean, I think, again, that's that education piece. The parents need to know the significance of this and how to promote faster healing, and that's by removing these things. And when they do that, they are going to see quicker healing. If they don't, it's going to extend the amount of time that them. All right, so in terms of what can we do in the classroom, what might we be asked as with it? Maybe you might be maybe 20 minutes of rest and then return. Maybe they're going to be, for a couple of days, only going half days or starting later, leaving early. Mental activity. So at home, if they're resting at home those first few days, then their parents are going to be told, let them watch TV for a half hour. If they have symptoms from their concussion after doing that, then you got to back off again. But if they can do that without any symptoms, then we're going to slowly increase it to maybe 45 minutes. Once they're, 30 to 45 minutes, we want them here. And we'll make the adjustments during their day that we need to so that they can be here and be learning and not just be home for 2 or 3 weeks because they have some symptoms that are continuing. One of the big things that Jamie will cover is if they are in the return to learn process, that means no PE, it means no recess, it means potentially no band, blowing into an instrument or swing choir, swinging around the stage. Those are all activities that might be part of their normal school day that they're going to have to sit out of while they are recovering. And then we'll be monitoring their symptoms as they go. Emotional symptoms is something that we maybe don't always think about in terms of being affected. Nervousness, anxiety, anger, kind of quick to cry, are all things that are very normal. Think about when you're really exhausted and tired. When your brain is that taxed, your emotional regulation is not as good. And so that's something that I think teachers just need to be aware of. And if it is one of the main symptoms that the student is experiencing, maybe that student's going to need a signal so that you just know they got to get out of here before they melt down in front of everybody. I think long term, if a student is having symptoms for 2-3 weeks, just be aware that there could be some secondary things going on. Depression, potentially. I mean, they're going to be pretty socially isolated. They can't go to PE. They can't, play in their sport that they really love. All of those things. Just now, and I'm having to leave the classroom because and I have all this. Help work through that. So some physical symptoms that students might have, we talk a lot about headache. That's kind of your scheduled rest breaks throughout their day, might need to have a hat. Think about like the room, like I said, music class already. You might need to get a little creative in terms of how to schedule their breaks and when to schedule their breaks, when they might need to be removed from some of those parts of their day for a time in order to promote healing. And then that last area of cognitive. So that's concentration, memory, maybe that feeling of being mentally foggy, slowed processing. And this is where a lot of, especially as older students, might need some of those accommodations where you're reducing the workload for that student. You're not expecting them to do as much, maybe postponing some due dates for them, allowing them to get notes from somebody else, extending time on assignments, or if they are going to take a test, allowing more time for them to take those tests. One thing that is recommended is the 25% rule. So consider, if appropriate for this student, especially those first couple days back post-concussion, consider, is there about 25% of the work that they really don't need to do? It's not crucial to their learning, or maybe I'm pretty confident they've already got these skills. I'm going to remove, those pieces. I'm also going to have about 25% that I'm going to require, and I'm going to make the adjustments so that it's appropriate and it can be expected that they're going to do that. And then the rest is what's negotiable. What can I maybe postpone? The biggest thing is just thinking, not piling on and expecting them to do everything from the days they've been gone and the days that they've had to leave because they need to go do their rest breaks. And then all of a sudden, here they have this huge stack of work. So just your awareness on that is the biggest thing, and just keep that 25% rule in your mind. And I think that most students will be able to manage that, particularly if everything's being managed properly and each day they can do more and more. I don't think that that's going to be a huge issue. All right, so big hitting on communication, right? Everybody's talking. Is going to look like school. All these that you're doing in your classroom, doctors don't dictate this. The kid comes in, parents to take him to, or whatever the case may be. You can still implement this process regardless. You've got, so you've got a lot of guidance here. You're not just, out there on your own as the teacher having to make these decisions. However, that being said, in order to resume that return to play process, you do need that medical clearance. So, return to activity is your ultimate goal for any student, whether it be your school sports or school sports, communicating that to other, club teams or anything like that. Ultimately, that's your goal. And there's that 3 to 4 week window where this is going to be important for a student, and then hopefully they'll be able to move on. The documentation is huge in terms of tracking concussions, tracking how long their symptoms are lasting, because if students do start to have multiple concussions and those discussions need to happen with the student and their family regarding their participation in activities. You've got a lot of data and you've got a lot of information that's already been tracked, and it's not just your opinion. It's data to help families make those decisions. And if things go longer than a month, you might be looking at a 504 plan if they're going to have symptoms that are going to be long term. But hopefully with this process in place, you're promoting healing, and you shouldn't need that. So I think Jamie's going to talk next about, so now you know about concussion, signs and symptoms to watch for, some things that you might be asked to do. Jamie's going to cover then exactly what it's going to look like. Is this up?
Yes, and then this is the packets for the counselors.
Okay.
So I have a handout for everyone, unless you're like a guidance counselor or in the guidance area, then you have a little bit bigger packet. So if you want to let them know if you're in that area, we can get you the packet.
So,
And then get that.
This is guidance. This here.
Oh, yeah.
Just because it's good.
So on the back is the wheel similar to what I showed you. So the signs and symptoms and possible adjustments that you might consider making in your classroom. On the front, Jamie's going to go through this. This is your school's flow chart. So your process for if you have a student returning that has sustained a concussion, this is the who's doing what and what the expectations are. Okay? That's for counselors. Anybody else? I can help you in a minute. Let me take this off.
Good morning. We are already doing in the health office already. And there are just some pieces that we need to do better at with communication with teachers and counselors and coaches. One of the big communication pieces with the student that died in Colorado was that he was coming to the nurse's office for Tylenol, and they were not communicating that to the coaches, but the nurse's office also did not know that he had hit his head. So the communication really is important to go both ways. We need coaches and teachers and everyone to tell us when they know that someone has hit their head, because actually we don't give them the same medication if we know that. So in the high school and stuff, we always ask them, did you hit your head? And they're usually pretty good about it. But some of the other kids, we're going to need that information from you. So. The concussion management team can consist of any of these people, and on the flow chart I've kind of color-coded whose responsibility it is according to what area we're looking at. But it's parents, teachers, school nurse, health para, counselor, trainer, athletic director, student, doctor, and all staff. So really anyone can be on this team, and once it gets started and we start communicating, a lot of these people end up involved. The beginning, third of the sheet, we already do, but we want you guys to be aware of what we do and know how important it is for you to communicate these things with us when you see something happen or if you're seeing symptoms. Anytime that someone comes in with a head injury into the health office or with concussion symptoms, they automatically go to no play. So if we're talking a really minor ping pong ball to the head kind of thing, or maybe not, but anyone that's at all significantly hit their head, we tell them no recess today, no PE today. If you're in high school, we talk to the trainer and they have to check them out first. So they automatically go to no play, and we want the health office to be notified. At school, don't make, but when right away we try to communicate with teachers. Doc now. That in Google Docs may not make a lot of sense because we've but that our phone and talk in person about how long it's lasting and what they're saying. It kind of bigger picture. School, a lot of times kids come in with headaches and say, I need some Tylenol. We always ask if they've hit their head, and sometimes that will start the process there. We have a form that tells us if they have hit their head, when we need to call 911, when they need to stay with us for 20 minutes, when they need to go home. So it's a very laid out process in every health office, what we do with certain symptoms. So that has been in place this year and last year, and so that process is already up and running and going fine. So then at that point, either the student is or isn't going to go to the doctor, and we don't have a lot of control over that. That's a parent decision, and that's something we can certainly encourage, but we can't tell anyone they have to go. Whether or not they do or don't go to the doctor, we're kind of using the time frame of 2 days. So if they have signs and symptoms of a concussion after a 2-day period, then we're feeling like they're not healing as quickly as they should be, and maybe we need to encourage them to call the doctor's office, or we need to start the return to learn process ourselves, which we are able to do. We can do return to learn and also tell them no play without a doctor's note. However, for them to return back into playing, we do have to get medical clearance. So that's just part of the legislation. So we start this concussion symptom inventory form, which Jill already showed you, where they give numbers between 1 and 6 on their severity and mark what their symptoms are. We give them a number. We need to check that at least once a week, but with the students that we're working with now, we're checking it about every day to every other day because they're coming in so often.
And so a week is just a minimum requirement, which we're way surpassing that right now. If for some, a lot of kids will be asymptomatic at the 2-day mark. No symptoms, are totally fine, they hit their head and they've healed. That's great, that's what we want. They can go ahead and return to play. Concussions inventory, and we will refer them to guidance counselors. What in those packets have guidance on there, like if they can tolerate 30 minutes, they should have this. If they can tolerate, if they have these symptoms, they but the guy what half days, or if they should be at home, or no screen time. But we think counselors could be very helpful in determining maybe what in the classroom would be good to pull out with the teacher. So in the counselor's packet, there's a return to academic progression, and we're just going to follow that as a guideline as far as what things to pull away from and what steps to be on based on how much activity they can tolerate. And then here we're going to reassess their symptoms weekly. And that will be done in the health office by the nurse. The health paras can do the health symptom inventory, but they're going to be communicating those scores with the nurses for us to be checking on them regularly too. Then at some point, as Jill said, as the student improves, we increase what they're able to do in the classroom. And as the student, if the student were to happen to continue to worsen and they're not tolerating what we are doing for them, we have to continue to pull back. So if they're still having headaches and we are only having them in the classroom at half days, we probably have to pull them out for whole days until they're able to tolerate more. And, because we're prolonging that healing period. And I feel like the longer we prolong the healing period, the more at risk they are of getting their head hit again and having second impact syndrome. So the quicker we can get it to heal, the less, it's just a lot less likely that they're going to hit their head again and have second impact syndrome. So that's just really important to get that piece going and get them healed as quickly as possible. And I really feel like asymptomatic is important. They just talk about it over and over. We really have to get them to just a very minimal score on their concussion symptom inventory, very few symptoms, rating it at a 1 if they have any at all, as we progress to each step. And then as they tolerate more, they just continue to go up. And some of these kids will go really fast, and some of them will go slow, and it's been not one person has this path in this. We need to collaborate with the and that kind of thing and find out what we do. The medical team the concussion has determined that they're ready to go back to base. We can start return to PE. They according to legislation, in order to do that, then we have to get the doctor's note to start it. As simple as a fax. Sometimes they'll just fax it over. The doctor's already seen them, and they fax and they say, okay, to return to play. And we can determine what they do and how much they play. And sometimes they order specific things. They can't do anything for another week, or, they can do this, but they can't do that. And, no contact sports maybe, or something like that. So everybody's very different, but when we do get to that return to play process, we do have to get a medical note. And that's something that the health office usually handles, or the parent just gets when they go to the doctor. If you know the student's going to the doctor, tell them that they're going to need a note to return back to playing so that they can just get it while they're there. We also have forms in the health office for release of information so we can communicate better with the doctor. We have just different, we can send the progression form with it so the doctor can just sign our progression form and say, yes, just follow this. And once we have that signed, then we just follow our regular progression, and he's just giving us the permission to do so. So it can go really smooth as long as everybody communicates, as long as everybody understands that, really no playing until we get the learning portion under control and they are asymptomatic in the classroom first. Just a couple of interesting facts looking at the two of them. Return to learn must be totally complete before we're returning to play. This isn't a small percentage of students that we actually implement this entire process. Some kids go through a small portion of the process or just the top health office portion, or we maybe don't have them play for a couple of days and then they're healed and it's done. So really the kids that get this whole process, it really is a small portion of the group, but it is pretty involved when we do have the kids go through it. To implement return to learn, you don't need a doctor's note, and we really do go need to say you can figure it out fairly quickly, and a lot of those kids younger kids like yeah. Themselves, okay? Head. Because they think that's the right answer. So we've kind of worked with that already, and we have a little bit of a hold on that. Return to play. Again, we have to get that written authorization, and greater than 2 days of signs and symptoms, we get the doctor note to return. And so we're kind of using that as our guideline only because we don't want to have to send every student with every minor head in, bonk to the doctor, because that is a lot of students at Norris. And it is at every school district because kids are just active and playing and having fun. So it happens, but we want to have a reasonable amount of time to let those symptoms go away before we feel like we need to get the doctor involved. The good thing here is that we have an athletic trainer in the health office in the high school. And so he can clear those high school students. So he can give us, because he's pediatric brain trained, and so he has everything he needs for all of that. And so we can clear the high school students here in the high school. If he's uncomfortable with it, then he requires a doctor's note too. So he does a really good job with that. The younger grades, we do have to get the note, okay, from the doctor. It has to be a medical doctor, a nurse practitioner, or an athletic trainer, and it cannot be a chiropractor note. Yep.
One other thing that coaches might be thinking about is I'm going to have kids on the flip side that are going to say they're not having symptoms because they want to play, even when they are having symptoms. And so that was one thing that we had talked about when we were planning this out, is that your athletic trainer may be doing the concussion symptom inventory with them at the end of the day, and when they get to practice, they're in practice mode, and they're going to say what they think they need to say in order to show I'm not having symptoms because I really want to play. And that's one thing that we talked about, having inventory and it's kind of a combination of education, understand the long-term implications of concussion, and kind of linking up that communication between their and their after school so that we make sure we are getting honest answers from them. They're being honest about reporting. And then you also kind of adjustments, and so if they are, then they're not cleared for return to place. There are a couple safeguards put in place.
Beginning of the impact test, their brain is back to baseline, and it's a pretty in-depth testing of memory and speed of recognition and that kind of thing. So if they can't pass that impact test and get back to the baseline where they were at the beginning of the school year, they're not letting them go back to play. So that's a great piece for the older high school kids who might be more prone to wanting to say that they want to go back to play too soon, that they actually have to pass this impact test, which is not probably easy to pass if you're having symptoms. So that's the good thing about that. And then I already said this, there's just more concern over the length of the symptom than any number of symptoms. So just remember that any one symptom that goes on for too long is concerning, and it's a lot more concerning than a couple of 4 or 5 symptoms within the first 2 days. And then we've already talked about, the concentration time, irritability, coping with stress, not coping with stress. Well, those are all things we need to watch for in the classroom. Lights and noise, physical symptoms. And then real quick, I just wanted to show you guys a couple of examples of students at Norris that are going through the process now. One is a high school student and one is a younger student, and kind of how this process has worked so far with some of them, and just to see how different it all is. This student, and this is what your Google Doc will look like. So when we start Return to Learn with any student, we will start this Google Doc in the health office and share it with all of that student's teachers, the counselor, and coaches. And then we will start documenting. And please feel free to document on here and put anything you want and call us, or just so that we're all staying within the loop, so that we know what happened after school at football practice, or we know that what we're doing is not working in the classroom, or that it is working and they're ready to go on to the next step. So this student fell off a rope and onto a tile gym floor, and actually this student was hospitalized and came back, and we started out with the concussion symptoms. Full day or half day that half. At the end of the day, with no activity, it was just using their brain in the classroom. Just that that we needed to. And again, we were implementing. Going to try to return again on tomorrow. So they've had 3 days of rest. We talked to mom about decreasing stimulation, trying to keep things quiet, that kind of thing. But this just kind of shows you how much your brain really does work during a school day, and how it can really affect those scores. And that student being that uncomfortable at the beginning of the day too is probably something that we will be giving the parents to Return to Learn information and say, we really need to go half days here, or we really need a day off, and we're going to let them rest, and that kind of thing, and try to get parents on board also with understanding the importance of rest. This was a high school student who had hit their head in wrestling, or injured their head in wrestling. Started out at a 14. He wasn't passing his impact testing, so he was not allowed to wrestle. We kept checking him. He kind of kept staying in the 14, 15 range. Was not really seeming to heal, even with no activity. So the trainer had said, we need to get a doctor's note. This has gone on too long. And this actually kind of went over Christmas break, so it looks a lot longer than it normally would be. But the trainer decided he's not healing fast enough. He needs to go get a doctor's note. So when he came back, we offered classroom adjustments. We did ask him about symptoms after a day of class only, and he was not symptomatic. So this would be a student that's doing only return to play, but did not need us to implement return to learn, because he was not having problems in the classroom. He was able to go through a full day of school without needing any adjustments and was staying asymptomatic through the day. He did go into the doctor, and he has been removed from wrestling for the season because he's just taking so long to heal, and he needs that time to rest. But this is an example of a student who was only if he were symptoms in the classroom, you can implement that and back in. Do you want clickers, Jill, or do you want me to ask for questions? And he doesn't no longer. This document will follow him, but we won't continue to assess him unless he were to have. We will print it out and it will go in. So, and then we also take all this information that goes in our health file, which we know that you guys can't necessarily see, and that's why we're putting it in so that everyone can see it. But we'll have several places where the documentation will be. What other questions are there about it?
Is there any like 3 strikes rule with concussions, or just all depends on their returning, how fast they are?
Right. I've not heard of a 3-strike rule. Really, their big thing in the legislation is making sure they're asymptomatic before you move to the next step. And as you move to each step, you just adjust back and forth until they're ready to play. And then really the return to play process is so similar, and probably a lot of you have maybe seen it. You get the doctor's note that says they can return to play, and then the trainer or the coach or the PE teacher or the nurse will decide how much activity they can do each day, and they should remain asymptomatic through it.
Yeah, I think that's just something, again, when you talk about education and awareness about concussions, that coaches and parents and doctors will need to kind of make those decisions on an individual basis. Blake Lawrence, a linebacker for UNL, was one of the leading ones in this legislation. Coach Pelini pulled him into his office after his 3rd concussion and said, if you're really fit, you do that. And he kind of gave himself an ultimatum, okay, if I get one more concussion, I'm done, because of the long-term potential implications of brain injuries. And then he ended up, got that 4th concussion for himself from the sport. And so I think it's that knowledge and education of the long-term effects and making sound decisions, because ultimately a single concussion is an injury that you can recover from fairly quickly and not have long-term effects. It's that once you get that first one, you're more susceptible to getting more, and then once you have sustained, there's no key number, but 3 or 4 or 5, whatever that is, you're just increasing the chances of long-term unknown implications. So I think, again, that awareness and coaches and trainers and year, potentially next year, he might be.
That will be the doctor's decision at that point, whether or not what he can or can't do and what activities he's allowed to participate in. So, but it is really important, and we have good parental support from that standpoint now. And so, we've got a couple of clickers questions, and then we'll finish, unless there's another question before then. Okay, should we?
So you guys can pass the clickers cards around if somebody hasn't used it yet, or however you want to do it. All right, so this is just kind of a brief review over what Jamie covered. So now we have A through D options. So who completes the concussion symptom inventory with students? Usually. Who's going to be the ones completing that?
All right, yes, that is correct. Classroom teacher, I'm not sure how you click it to go to the next one. But actually, health office staff and athletic trainer are the ones that will do the concussion symptom inventory. Classroom teachers are going to communicate with us back and forth, help us decide what to do, but the actual inventory sheet that we take that they get a 0 to 6 score on, it will be the health office staff and the trainers that will do that test. Okay? Who documents student information on the concussion management Google Doc? The health office, counselor, teacher, or all of the above?
Who's documenting on the Google Doc?
Yes, that is. We want. Check on it. We're going to reshare the health office, get a new score if we feel like it's significant. We'll reshare new, and then of course, and over the phone. But this is just a way to get the big picture and to that everybody can see the progression of what's happened.
Some schools actually have concussion management teams. Google Doc is a way to reduce the amount of go to. And you can always pick up the phone and call Jamie, but you can also get on Google Doc and say, left my classroom 3 times today, or isn't utilizing any adjustments that I'm offering to them, or whatever the case may be. Just make sure that you're documenting that. Because if you don't, then Jamie's probably going to.
Do I just hit the arrow?
No, I can do it.
Oh, okay.
All right. Oh, you're not going to be able to see everything, though?
In order to move from return to learn to return to play, what must occur? Parents and teachers meet and determine student no longer needs the adjustments. The student must be cleared by a doctor or trainer, or after the student's score on the CSI is at, I believe,
Baseline, the nurse can clear them. Or D is any of the above. Sorry, it's too big on there. It doesn't all fit.
so in order to go to return to play, what must
Return to
occur?
play. So that's the habit. Okay. Very good. Yes, that return to play piece has to have the medical.
Has to-
medical clearance.
So B is the right answer. Yeah, we have to have the doctor's note to continue on to return to play.
So the reason why it's not all of the above is that nurse, parents, teachers, you do have to have the parents also sign off on it. The teachers and school health office people can't actually clear them. Athletic trainer can clear them. All right, so who's writing the plan? Who's the person responsible for writing the plan?
The adjustments in the classroom. correct. It is the guidance are going to what class just be very involved in that also and be giving input and working together as a team. But we've decided that the guidance counselor next step, and they can make those recommendations. Who is responsible for ensuring that students do not participate in athletics, recess, PE, or other physical activities until medically cleared? The nurse, teacher, parents, or everyone? All right. Yes, it is everyone. Super important. You know, we can't be in PE and recess and everywhere. And so it's really important that if you are on recess duty and you know this student is not supposed to be participating, that we follow through on that. If you're the teacher, we make sure that we're communicating with the recess people. One thing that's hard for the health office staff to know is we know who the students' teachers are, but we don't know who's on recess duty. And we don't know always, if there's a sub or that kind of thing. So it's important you communicate with your subs and you communicate with the paras and you share that document with the paras or whoever the recess duty people are, or you ask us to share it with them because we don't really know that information. So that was the last one. Okay, so I think that is it. Just a couple of things. Thanks for participating and listening. One other thing that we need to do as a health office staff is make sure that you have the opportunity to practice with EpiPens if you would like. So there is that front table when you first come into the auditorium. If anyone wants to practice with an EpiPen trainer or wants to go over EpiPens today, I will be out there for just a little while this morning when you go. And we just make sure that everybody's comfortable with it and ready to use it.
Clarification, the EpiPens are not
Right. Concussion. Go.